NAA iSeries webinar. I am Curtis Kitchen, the Director of Publications and Trade Show for the National Auctioneers Association, and I would like to thank you for joining us for today's newest iSeries installment. iSeries is a free informational webinar series produced by the NAA in order to share auction industry knowledge and insight with NAA members and the general public. We are excited to present today's topic on prospecting estate auctions, but before we do, we want to share more with you about NAA. Headquartered in Overland Park, Kansas, NAA is the world's largest association dedicated to auction professionals and represents the interests of thousands of auction professionals in the United States and across the world. NAA is dedicated to providing educational programming and resources to help members advance themselves professionally. NAA members are an active, thriving, trend-setting group who abide by a strict code of ethics and belong to a worldwide network of peers, buyers, and sellers. The NAA's mission is to provide critical resources to auction professionals that will enhance their skills and successes, and its vision is that NAA members are the preferred auction professionals used in the marketplace. Among resources provided is the iSeries, and today's session will be presented by distinguished auction veteran Joe Gribbins. A third-generation auctioneer with over 45 years in the auction industry, Joe is experienced in a wide spectrum of auctions, including real estate, estate settlement, commercial, and industrial. He is also an experienced auction instructor and special projects consultant for the Kentucky Board of Auctioneers. Joe was elected to the NAA Certified Estate Specialist Course Rewrite Committee in 2014 and selected as an NAA Certified Estate Specialist Designation Course Instructor in 2015. In 2012, he was appointed by the state governor to the Kentucky Board of Auctioneers with a reappointment in 2015. Joe was inducted into the Kentucky Auctioneers Association Hall of Fame in 2004 and was named KAA Auctioneer of the Year in 2012. With that background and a wealth of experience, we are very honored to have him as our iSeries presenter today. Before the presentation begins, please note that you may take part in the conversation. Type and submit your questions at any time during the presentation, and we'll get to as many of those as we can during our brief Q&A period. After that, we will also ask you to please take part in a very short 3-question poll as well. With that, Joe, thank you, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Curtis. I appreciate the introduction, and I want to thank everyone for joining us today for this webinar. Today we are going to be covering prospecting for estate auctions. So let's get started. There's 4 primary prospecting areas that we're going to be covering today. Attorneys, estate personal representatives and executors, clients and customers, networking, and your circle of success. So let's go ahead and get right into it with the attorneys. Now, I know, this is an obvious target for prospecting estate auctions, but we also want to remember when we talk about the attorneys, we don't want to overlook the paralegals. Now, not all attorneys have paralegals, but for the ones that do have paralegals, they rely on them quite a bit. And often, if an attorney has to go out and find an auctioneer for their client, they don't already have one, they're going to turn that job over to their paralegal. So as we talk about attorneys, let's remember the paralegals. Obviously, the attorneys we want to try to reach are the probate attorneys, the ones that are in your area that specialize in estate planning and estate probate. But we also want to reach the general attorneys that are in general practice that occasionally handle real estate planning and probate. Now, my co-instructor, CES David Whitley, likes to bring up an interesting concept about probate attorneys. He talks about the inexperienced probate attorneys, the ones that have been practicing for 5 or 10 years, versus the more experienced probate attorneys. And your inexperienced probate attorneys, and again, by that I mean just ones that have been practicing for maybe up to 10 years, they do a lot of estate planning and they will write a lot of wills. But they don't necessarily do an awful lot of the actual probate work versus the more experienced probate attorneys who have been doing it for maybe 15, 20, or even 25 years. They tend to do more probate work. Why? Because their client base is older and unfortunately passing away. So, but when we talk about prospecting, we want to prospect to all the attorneys. If they handle probate cases, we want to prospect to them. But it's just interesting. David looks at that and you stop to think about it. It makes sense. Now, in just a minute, we're going to talk about how to find these probate attorneys. But first, I want to look at what the probate attorneys are looking for from the auctioneer. And I think really, if I had to, I could sum this up by saying, professionalism along with comfort and confidence. Comfort. They want to be comfortable recommending you to their client. The attorney does not want negative feedback from their clients regarding someone they referred. Now, remember, if you're going to go out and do an estate an estate auction that was referred by an attorney, that executor, personal representative, is going to at some point in time get some feedback to that attorney. So you want to be sure that that feedback going back to that attorney is going to be positive. Talk about confidence. You know, the probate attorney wants to have confidence in you. They want to have confidence that you're going to be doing a professional job for their client, that you're going to conduct the auction professionally, that you're going to interact with the family members professionally. Now, you know, most family members get along in estate situations. Some don't so well, and some don't get along at all. So what that probate attorney is going to be looking at is when you get into a situation where the family's not getting along, how are you going to handle those situations? You know, sometimes it takes a little special effort to handle those situations where the family members aren't getting along, and that's what those attorneys are looking for. Now, another aspect of this that I think kind of separates, you know, the auctioneers that simply do auctions, including estate auctions, from the auctioneers that call themselves estate auctioneers is service to the family. You know, doing an estate auction is not just selling stuff; it's being a problem solver. You know, some families nowadays are very, very busy. They don't have a lot of time. And some family members even live out of town. So if needed, and it's not always needed, but if it is needed, can you and will you handle things such as donation of, you know, clothes and other items that are not appropriate for the auction, you know, disposable prescription medicines or food items even, hazardous materials such as getting rid of old and other things such as that. Even sometimes some property management type services, like if you need to get some minor repairs taken care of on the property or finding someone to mow the grass. You know, you might think, well, you know, Joe, what's this really got to do with estate auctions? Well, this is what the probate attorneys are looking for. In other words, what can you do as the auctioneer to make the executor's job easier? What can you do to make the attorney's job easier? Even things like boxing up family memorabilia, stuff like that. Go that extra mile. Now, if you're going to be doing those services I just talked about, be sure you get paid for them. Be sure you get compensated. And to be honest with you, it should also be a profit center for you. You should be making money from that. Okay? Now, like I said, we're going to talk just a minute about how to find these attorneys, but once you do, how do you make contact with these attorneys? Well, the first thing you do once you locate these attorneys is put them on your auction mailing list and your email list. Next way you get a hold of them, of course, is good old-fashioned cold calls. You call and set up appointments to introduce yourself and your services. Now, I can tell you that some of the attorneys aren't going to go along with this because they simply don't have the time, but you try it. Another alternative to that is drop by personal visits. You simply drop by their office. Now, you're probably not going to talk to the attorney. You'll probably be talking to the receptionist, but that's okay because at least you got into the office. And when you go in that office, you're going to bring with you a leave behind, or it's a company brochure, or a pocket folder with company information. And then at that point in time, too, you can request an appointment or at least let it be known that you would be happy to meet with the attorney and to explain your services and to answer any questions. Now, before you go meet with that attorney, you start striking up a conversation with that attorney, be sure that you can speak their lingo, their language, if you will, especially estate language. You need to have some basic understanding of the probate concept and how the probate process works. Understand some of the basic terms. Do you know the difference between an executor and administrator, and even an administrator with will annexed, and how the difference there could impact an auction? Or if you're in a state that uses personal representatives, do you know the difference between a supervised estate and an unsupervised estate? And again, how that could impact an auction. Do you understand the difference if the attorney tells you that the deceased passed away testate or intestate? And again, how does that impact the auction? Yeah, these are things you need to know. When you talk to these attorneys, they want to understand that you understand the estate process and some basic estate terminology. Now, some other professionals I want to mention before we get to the next slide is bank trust officers. A lot of your larger banks that have divisions which handle estate planning and wealth management services, they're good ones also to prospect for estate auctions. CPAs. Nowadays, there are CPAs that specialize in seniors accounting. And if you get a large estate, it has a lot of assets, you may very well find that there's a CPA assisting the family in that settlement of that estate. So the more CPAs you can get your name out in front of, the better. And of course, another one is funeral directors. All right, let's go to our next slide. Estate personal representatives / executors. And let me clarify one thing too. You may already know this or may not, but some states call the person handling that estate a personal representative. Other states, under their law, call them executors or administrators. Doesn't make much difference for our purposes today, but just understand it's going to depend on the state that you live in. And another thing to remember too is that not all the states use attorneys. It's not required. Most of the states will use an attorney to help people, the executors, go through that process, but they don't have to. Now, again, how do we get in touch with that personal representative or the executors? Well, the best way is a referral from that estate attorney. If you walk in on an appointment with that executor, and that executor called you because they got your name and your number from that attorney that's helping handle the estate, and they trust that attorney, then you're way ahead of the game. You got a good probability of walking out of that appointment with that auction. Right? How else to get a hold of these personal representatives and executors? Word of mouth, referrals from the executors' family members, their, the co-workers, people they go to church with. A lot of things we're going to talk about with here in just a minute on networking. But word of mouth is very, very strong. Direct mail. Now, I got to tell you, direct mail, as far as getting in touch with the executors, that's good and bad. Yes, you can reach the executors with direct mail, but many executors do not like being solicited in this way, and some of them can even become offended by it. And I can also tell you that some of the probate attorneys don't like professionals that also try to solicit the executors through the mail. But direct mail to the executors does work. I know in a lot of bigger cities, it's used by realtors looking to list the property. It's used by the folks that, we buy houses for cash, and many, many others. So just remember that direct mail can work, but it also can go back to haunt you sometimes. All right, still, how do we get the information on the executors and those attorneys that are handling the estates? Well, I know some people say, well, look at the local obituaries. Now, to be honest with you, that's not going to do you a whole lot of good because usually it does not have the name of the executor or the attorneys. So, again, where do we get this list of the appointed personal representatives and executors for estates? Well, you have to start at the probate court itself. Go to the probate court, and again, in your county, in your state, they might call it some other court, but it's still going to handle the probate cases. But you go to that court, and you go to the clerk's office, the probate court clerk's office, and ask them simply how you can get a list. Right? Now, they may tell you that that list is published, bi-weekly or monthly or whatever in the local newspaper. Fine, great, there it is. Or they might tell you of a service that you can go to subscribe to get that information. Or they may also tell you you have to go somewhere, another place in the courthouse, and just look up the records. But some way, somehow, you can get those records. They're public records now. So you have to do your homework, find out where can you go to get those records, who's been qualified as that executor or personal representative, and again, usually that's going to contain the names of the probate attorneys. And that's important because it tells you the probate attorneys that actually handle probate. When you get those records, which attorney's name keeps coming up over and over again, that's the ones you want to go prospect. But you can't just look on the attorney's website because it'll tell you, oh yeah, they do estate work. Well, they may not really do that much probate. So that's why you need to look at those records. Okay, slide number 3. Clients and customers, current and past. We're talking about word of mouth and referrals. Yes, I know that this is an old saying, but it is very, very true. Every auction is a job interview for a future auction. Okay, how you and your staff conduct your auction is very important. And this is how you, over time, build good word of mouth and referrals. But you also want to establish yourself with your clients and customer as the auctioneer or auction company that specializes in estates. Now, how do you do that? Well, start off with your auction brochures and your ads. Maybe use some kind of a tagline like, the estate auctioneer or the estate specialist. Very important nowadays are websites. A lot of people, if they decide they want to have an auction or thinking of it, but they don't know where to turn to, they will go and Google or search auctioneers or auction companies in their area. How good is your website? How helpful is it? If someone visits your website, will they see that you specialize in estates? Do you have helpful links, articles, or how-to lists, or even blogs about estates? Not just estate auctions, but about estates. Another way of building this with your clients and customers is to obtain your CES designation and then promote that, right? Put it on your business cards, on your auction brochures, on your company letterhead. And again, we get back to that website. You know, the website, I can't emphasize enough, is very important. But have that on your website. And once you do get that designation, I'll be honest with you that a lot of times the general public, they're not going to know what those 3 letters behind your name mean, CES. You know, Joe Gribbins, CES. Well, what's that? If you can, and wherever you can, put down there what CES stands for. Joe Gribbins, CES, Certified Estate Specialist. Okay? Because what you're really trying to do, as far as prospecting your current clients and customers, you want to get into their mind, you want them to think of you and your company, that you and your company are the estate specialist. You want to create that brand, that you and your company are the estate specialists. So you have to keep putting that out in front of them and get them to think that way. Okay, networking and your circle of success. Well, you know, networking. Who do you network with? Well, everybody you know, everybody you come in contact with. You know, your barber, your mechanic, your florist, your dry cleaner, your plumber, you know, people that you meet at your civic clubs, the Chamber of Commerce, even parents at your son or granddaughter's soccer games, you know, everybody and anybody. You know, remember, you're not just an auctioneer, though, when you're networking. Now you're an auctioneer that specializes in estates. Make that point. And always leave behind a business card, when it's appropriate, with hopefully the CES designation on it, and again, have that CES spelled out. Who do you network with? Everybody. And everybody. Anybody and everybody is what you're networking with. When do you network? Constantly, 24/7. If you're awake, you're networking. If you're asleep, you're dreaming about networking. It's important, and that's a great way of prospecting. Real quickly, talking about circle of success. Circle of success, the concept of that is not just networking, but taking it to the next level. Establishing personal and business relationships of referring business to each other. Now you can see on the slide some examples. The obvious one there is the probate attorneys. You know, the probate attorneys recommend you for business to their clients. If while you're networking, you run across someone that needs some estate planning, needs a will drawn up, who you can refer them to? Back to that same probate attorney. Again, you refer business back and forth, and you can look at that list. You can see other people you can do the same way. Right? But the circle of success is extremely important. It takes years to build up, but it can make a big, big difference. I know Chris Pratt, NAA Auctioneer from South Carolina. Chris is really big on the circle of success because it's really worked for him. And he gets a lot of auctions from the circle of success, has been very successful with that. But it's like a lot of other things, your circle of success, you're only going to get out of it what you put into it. But it's a great way of prospecting for estate auctions. Okay. Well, I think our time's about up, and therefore this does conclude this section of the webinar. And again, I want to thank everybody again today for joining us. But I think now, Curtis, we have time for a question or two, correct?
Yeah, we do. Thank you, Joe, for that presentation. We really appreciate it. And as you were just saying, at this time, as we mentioned earlier, we will now open the floor to our iSeries attendees who may have questions. If you have not done so already, you can submit your question, and we will do our best to get to as many of them as we are able here in the next few minutes. Joe, our first question is from Doug, and he wants to know, back when you were talking about administrators, what is a good source, or what's a source for finding out who the administrators are?
It's the same source we talked about before. It's the probate court, because an administrator is going to be someone that was not named in the will, or there was no will. So again, if you can find those records in the probate court, and usually you start at the clerk's office, that's going to tell you who's the executor or the administrator.
All right, and a follow-up question to that then. You mentioned that there's a difference between an executor and an administrator. Could you briefly explain the difference?
Right. In states such as Kentucky, which I'm at, the executor is named in the will. And an administrator is going to be named in a situation where the executor named in the will is not qualified or refuses to serve or someone objects to them. Right? And in that case, the judge will order an administrator to take care of the estate. And all that simply means in that situation is that the executor that was named in the estate was not appointed. Now, you also look at the administrator, and you have to look at whether or not it's an administrator with will annex, because that means the will still goes along with it, and that's important for the states that require specific language in the will for the sale of real estate. Also, if there is no will, and people do unfortunately pass away, and they don't have a will. In that case, since there's no will, there's no executor named in the will, and now you're going to have an administrator. But an administrator, and this is how it impacts the auction, is in a lot of states it's going to have to go back to court and get court approval to transfer the real estate. That's why it's important to know those differences.
Okay, and another question here from Harry. What's the best way to get bankers? You mentioned that was an important source for prospecting. How do you get those folks?
You just have to try to find an in. To be honest with you, if you can find somebody that knows one of those bankers that can get you in the door, because again, those can be difficult people to get in front of, but if nothing else, you just had a cold call. Just do some legwork and find out, first off, does that bank have a wealth management division? Because if they have a wealth management division, then they're probably handling estates as well. And you just have to get in there and do some legwork and find out who these folks are. You might be able to find out on the internet, but sometimes it just takes legwork. Talk to your attorneys that you do work with, that you know, see if they know of anybody, and then just do the best you can to try to get in front of those folks, or at least send them some company information.
Okay, and we have time for one more question here. And this one, you mentioned comfort at the very beginning, and I wondered if there was something specific that you've done or that you know other people have done that really helps inspire that comfort level that you were talking about.
A lot of that comfort level comes from the attorney having confidence in you. They're comfortable referring you because they know you're going to do a good job. And another thing I've heard the attorneys tell me is that they know that I'm looking out for that executor. They know that I know enough, not to practice law, but I know enough about the probate process that I can keep the executor from getting in trouble. If they're starting to do something they shouldn't do, I'm like, no, you need to call your attorney. And it's just a matter of that probate attorney being comfortable in them turning over, if you will, their client to you.
Got it. All right. Well, thank you, everyone, for submitting your questions. If we did have a couple, I think we did have a couple come in here that we didn't have time to get. We will submit those to Joe, and we will try to get some answers for you offline, and then we'll be able to supply those to you that way. So thank you again for today's Q&A, and that'll wrap up that portion. We have collected your questions, like I said, and we'll forward them to Joe. Now that we've done that, it's now time for you to give us your feedback on today's session. Please see the poll on your screen and answer the questions as they appear. We will move fairly quickly, so please answer as swiftly as you're able. We'll give each answer about 5 to 10 seconds, and then we'll move on. The first question here today is, I learned something today that I will use to prospect future estate auctions. It's a very, very easy yes, maybe, or no answer. Again, the question, I learned something today I will use to prospect future estate auctions. And we'll give you just a few seconds to answer that question. Okay, and question number 2, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score and 1 being the lowest, how would you rate today's iSeries presentation? Again, on a scale of 1 to 5, with 5 being the highest score and 1 being the lowest, how would you rate today's iSeries presentation? We'll give you just a few seconds to answer this. Okay, and your final question in the poll today, I plan to take the CES designation program in the future. Yes, maybe no, or I already have my CES, which we would absolutely take that answer in a heartbeat. But again, the question, I plan to take the CES designation program in the future. And we'll go ahead and wrap that question up. And thank you, everyone, for taking part in the survey. Your feedback does help us tremendously as we plan for future iSeries. Before we end today's session, we do have some updated information on upcoming NAA events. The NAA Designation Academy is just 8 weeks from now, December 4th through the 10th in Las Vegas. Sign up for the designation of your choosing, including the Certified Estate Specialist that you heard Joe describing here today. That course is December 8th through the 10th. And very important, you can also take GPPA in December. The only time of year it is offered get to Las Vegas and get trained in personal property. It's a hugely valuable skill in estate auctions. Again, that's the GPPA course also being offered during the NAA Designation Academy. For more information on these courses or any other part of the Academy and to register, visit auctioneers.org and check out the education calendar, or you can contact Carrie Boydston at 913-563-5432. That's 913-563-5432, and tell Carrie you want to attend the NAA Designation Academy. And again, you can also check that out online at auctioneers.org. As we close today, you will get a replay of today's session. I know we had several folks asking about that. You'll get a replay of today's session through an emailed link by the end of this week. In addition, if you are an NAA member and you've missed any previous iSeries sessions, or you'd like to just hear them again, iSeries archives are available at auctioneers.org/NAA-education. One more time, auctioneers.org/NAA-education. You do need to be an active member, and you will need to log in to access those. And finally, our next iSeries webinar, as it always is 2 months from now, every other month, the first Wednesday of every month. Our next iSeries webinar will be Wednesday, December 7th at 2 p.m. Central, and we'll focus on auction marketing. So we hope you can make it for that. We will send specific information on that in the near future. Thank you again for taking part in today's NAA iSeries. It does conclude today's webinar. And remember that the NAA iSeries exists because it's about you. Everyone, have a great afternoon.